A federal judge has struck down one of Governor Ron DeSantis's biggest culture war accomplishments of the past couple of years. This is the Stop Woke Act, which is as dumb as it sounds. The legislation prohibits educational institutions and businesses from teaching students and employees anything that would cause anyone to, quote, feel guilt, anguish, or any form of psychological distress due to their race, color, sex, or national origin. It specifically outlaws teachings that may promote guilt or invoke senses of privilege for, quote, actions committed in the past by other members of a group. We're gonna briefly detour to point out that the group that has railed against snowflakes for years and years and years wants to make sure that under penalty of law, you're not made to feel any negative feelings. Anyway, Judge Mark Walter decided to at least temporarily strike this down. And in doing so, he quoted George Orwell's 1984 saying, "It was a bright, cold day in April and the clocks were striking 13. And the powers in charge of Florida's public university system have declared the state has unfettered authority to muzzle its professors in the name of freedom." Defendants argue that under this act, professors enjoy academic freedom so long as they express only those viewpoints of which the state approves. This is positively dystopian. Our professors are critical to a healthy democracy, and the state of Florida's decision to choose which viewpoints are worthy of illumination and which must remain in the shadows has implications for us all. If our priests of democracy are not allowed to shed light on challenging ideas, then democracy will die in darkness. The DeSantis administration, of course, is going to appeal this, and one can guess where the Supreme Court would come down on this. But this is an explicitly censorious law. It is the government of Florida stopping professors from teaching accurate history, amongst other topics. Brett, what do you think?
And it's insanely vague to say that if you feel a little bit, if the kids might feel a little guilty for anything, like a reasonable person would feel guilty if you traced what happened from slavery through Jim Crow through voter suppression laws. Like a reasonable person would feel guilty. So essentially, the framework that they laid down is that you can't tell people facts. And that's what they're talking about is dystopian. They're making it so that you have to tell the kids like, it's okay, everything's fine. I'm gonna coddle you and not tell you these facts as they happened. And I totally understand like the idea that you shouldn't like drop kids into like the worst ideas. You should shield kids from some ideas until they're old enough to understand it. But that's not what this Stop Woke Act protected them from. It protected it. What it did, the Stop Woke Act and the entire fight against critical race theory and everything was the Republicans looking around and saying, how do we harness resentment of white people? The white people feel toward anyone who might point out any facts. And so they started a years-long crusade against something that didn't really exist. No one was really taking kids and saying, you're white, so you're evil. They were saying there was slavery and it made it harder. The legacy of that we can easily trace through a certain kind of person being treated better by society than another. That's it. And what this does, all this does is have the Florida government tell people that they can't learn certain things and that people hired by the government can't say those things.
Yeah, and look, you can be against this for, obviously this is a propagandistic law. It's designed to produce teaching that favors one inaccurate historical worldview. And they say they're against propaganda. It obviously, like, if you're worried about snowflakes, the idea of passing this is ridiculous. If you supposedly are against cancel culture, the idea of firing professors for teaching factual history is ridiculous. So all of this is inherently hypocritical, but also like no one, as Brett said, no one is being trained that they are personally culpable for slavery or culpable for anything that happened before they were born. You are only responsible for the things you do now, and they don't want you to even be responsible for that. But if the idea is, how dare you state that there was ever systemic racism, that the structures of government were ever used in a racist fashion, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna use the structures of government to stop you from ever learning the accurate history of racism in America, that is a demonstration of the continued need to teach that. It's been stopped right now. We're gonna see what the Supreme Court. I have a feeling they're not going to knock it down. And by the way, really fast, this isn't even really about stopping kids from learning this, because the joke is on them. This is the American education system. They weren't gonna learn much of the accurate history of structural racism anyway. This, to me, is DeSantis sending a signal to adults in Florida, I'm gonna protect your kids from them damn lefties. That's, to me, what it's far more about. It's sending a signal to them that I'm not gonna ever have your kids learn dangerous things that they could then start to judge you based on. Again, not based on personal culpability with slavery or anything, but based on what those adults are saying and doing right now.
The worst part is that it's working. The part that frustrates me is like that it's fooled. This whole, it's an absolute extension of the, Democrats drink baby blood. QAnon conspiracy theory. That's what they're doing. They're trying to extrapolate that and translate it so that it's more palpable to larger audiences, but it's the same dynamic. And the worst part is that like all these comedians have been snowed by this approach. The Joe Rogans, the Dave Chappelle's, people who I have been entertained by before, Bill Maher as well. I watch the show and I laugh at certain parts, but still, they all have turned into Lenny Bruce. Now, Lenny Bruce did a lot of great comedy and then got arrested for obscenity because he used a bad word. But the difference between Lenny Bruce and these guys who think they're the new Lenny Bruce is those guys didn't get arrested. Those guys are just like sitting in their really fancy condos and houses being like, it's so tough to be me.
Yeah. The consequences aren't being locked up. The consequences are that people don't think that their lowest common denominator, hack, racist, and misogynistic jokes are funny anymore. And sure, some people do. You can have those people laugh at your jokes. It's just not the widespread acclaim that you probably wish you'd have.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.